Before I jump into slides, I have 20-ish slides I'll run through. First, just want to give a huge shout out to George and the team at Minutia. Minutia's been a wonderful partner to Superpath going back a couple of years now. I'm always happy to do work with them. George and I sat down together to figure out what questions should be included in the survey. We talked through the data. Really happy to have George on. I'm going to present the stuff, and then George, I'll look to you for commentary. I'm curious what you're seeing on your side. Before we get into that, would you mind, just for folks who are not already aware of who you are in Minutia, could you just give a quick intro of yourself and tell us briefly about Minutia too?
Yeah, so George Hasiotis, I'm the managing director at Minutia, which is a content marketing agency for SaaS companies. And I'm also the founder of Growth Waves, which is a bi-weekly newsletter on all things B2B growth. Feel free to head over to growthwaves.com and sign up. And as Jimmy said, our relationship with Superpath goes back to 2021, I would say, and we've done quite a few things together. I think that this report is one of the most important things because not only we surveyed quite a few folks to increase and improve the quality of the data, but we as a community, as an industry, right? Like the content marketing industry are under quite a few changes lately. And I think that this report will help us all put things in perspective and establish some benchmarks, understand what's normal and what's not normal, and in general have a better understanding of where we are now and how we can navigate the changes that are coming, right? So that's all. I guess we can get started.
Cool, let's do it. Once I start sharing, I will not be able to see the chat. So if anything comes up, any audio issues or technical issues, maybe George, you can just let me know. And just a reminder, use that live chat, ask questions, weigh in. Okay, cool. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, first, quick overview of this. 2023, I don't need to remind anyone how chaotic it's been. We've heard a lot of stories. People have had a lot of individual experiences that have been super frustrating. I found that it's very difficult to kind of make sense of what's going on. So one of the main purposes of this survey and report is to start to put some data behind what's going on. I expect this will be an annual thing, so we'll have some benchmarks to measure against when we do this next year. We had 685 in-house content marketers weigh in. We asked everyone who filled it out to verify that they worked in-house. Nothing against the freelance crowd. We love the freelance crowd. But we're really trying to understand here is what's happening at SaaS companies and agencies. Again, quick shout out to Minutia. Also, quick shout out to Melanie Broder, who actually wrote the report for us. She did a wonderful job. So thank you, Melanie. And also, as part of this, we randomly gave away 5 Amazon gift cards to folks who contributed. Those emails went out this morning. I basically took everyone's email address that opted into that, put it in Excel, randomized it 3 times, and then picked the first 5. So if you got that email, please respond and we'll get you your Amazon gift card. Okay, cool. Let's dive in. So first, just a quick look at who responded to this. We asked everyone for a job title. We gave them radio buttons to respond to rather than freeform. So these are kind of the closest equivalent of their actual job title. Also, just a heads up that these are listed in order of the number of people with that job title, not seniority, which I realize could be a little bit confusing because it looks sort of the same, but we had mostly head of content and content leads. That was kind of exactly what we were hoping for. Actually, these tend to be the people who are feeling the brunt of a lot of the changes right now. So I feel pretty confident that 685, obviously there's a lot more content marketers out there, but I feel that's pretty good sample size and indicative of trends that we're seeing kind of beyond the people who responded to this survey. The first question we asked was just, how excited are you about the future of content marketing? I think I was actually a bit surprised by the responses here. Most people indicated that they were between a 7 and an 8 on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of their excitement. I actually feel really personally excited about that. I think if we had asked the same question in January or again in May or maybe in July, that we might have gotten different answers. A lot of the people's feelings behind their excitement or lack of excitement, I think, has been at least closely tied, not causation, but correlation with the rise of ChatGPT and AI. And I think a lot of that has turned from fear to skepticism, maybe to some kind of cautious optimism about where all of this is heading. So, just as a starting off point, people generally feel pretty darn good about where content marketing is heading. And I was really happy to see this because it has been a really challenging year. Of the 12 or so years that I've been working in this industry, this was the hardest year. It's not even close. So excited to see that folks seem to see a light at the end of the tunnel and feel that there's like a healthy future for this industry. For some of these, we had people weigh in just to give some kind of more anecdotal input on this. So Todd Magnan, new CEO over at Animals, said that these pressures are essentially giving way to kind of a new era of content, right? Like the SEO stuff, kind of the over optimized, tried and true, but now overly used playbook is basically dead. Um, I actually talked to him as I was getting this quote from him, and he expects that we'll see a lot more emphasis on companies wanting to measure content performance more closely, tie it more closely to business objectives. I think that's been like a little loosey goosey over the past couple of years. It's kind of hard to do anyways. A lot of companies kind of overlook that in favor of just like continuing to pump out more and more content. And I think he's 100% right that those days have mostly passed us by and that there's going to be a lot more oversight of content and probably more careful spend. George, as a fellow agency owner, I'm curious, like your reaction to that, and if that's what you're seeing from some of the customers that you all are working with.
Yeah, actually, just today, I had three discussions with three different clients on measurement, on performance measurement. And I mean, at Minutia, we were a bit late when it comes to like reporting, but when you hear something and it becomes sort of like a pattern, you understand that you have to do something about it, right? And so we took action, and actually we are building something really robust that measures the impact of our work, of course, in the best possible way, right? Because when it comes to online data, there are so many things you can't really measure and have a good idea about. But I think that, yeah, this is where things are heading. And if you connect that with the fact that, you know, people may feel some budgets in general, not just for content marketing, are a bit more scrutinized right now, I would say that it makes sense that like people who are hiring or like working with agencies or running teams, they want to measure the impact of like what they do. So yeah, I think that this makes sense.
Yeah, one thing I hope emerges from this is an industry standard way to measure content. Every team I've ever talked to about content attribution and reporting does it a slightly different way. And I think having maybe not a single industry standard, but maybe 3 to 4 based on the type of businesses and the type of content playbook they're running would be really helpful. If anyone's got an attribution setup that they really like, I would really encourage you to start to write about it, share it. Like the more actually I think that we can standardize this, the easier it will be for content teams to make a case that the work that they're doing is contributing to the business. A few other folks responded to this question. This is kind of the most kind of like the lightning rod question that a lot of people left anecdotal feedback on. Marjorie, an in-house content marketer, said that she's never been more excited for the future of the industry. The AI stuff is essentially democratizing content marketing. I find that to be really interesting, and that's the sentiment I've heard from a lot of people, that AI, in a sense, is replacing all of the kind of low end, easy to create. Junk is too strong of a word, but just sort of like all the easy stuff. It's not really worth spending tons of time doing that if ChatGPT can do it, which actually frees up the in-house content marketers and the freelance writers to think more creatively, to focus on differentiation, better ideas, stronger writing, or distribution, kind of all the things that I think many of us have put to the side in favor of optimizing for algorithms. So I think that's a great perspective. And certainly she's not the only one I've heard that from. Ronnie, I don't know if Ronnie's here, but Ronnie had a slightly different take. He said, I think we're witnessing the end of B2B content marketing as we know it. Our over-reliance on SEO tools has clogged the internet with a gray goo of useless copycat content. And AI is essentially going to make that problem worse. I actually reached out to Ronnie this morning. We chatted on Slack. I just wanted to clarify what he meant by this. And actually his take is, with more context, is far more optimistic than how this reads. Basically what he said is like, if we can adapt to this, sort of take a new, fresh approach to content marketing, it's going to be fantastic. And we should all be excited about that. If we continue to go down the hall of serving the algorithms, like, relying on AI generated content for the bulk of the work that we produce, like that's going to be kind of a dark, sad place to exist. But if we can use this stuff for efficiency, for better workflow, things like that, and then sort of like Marjorie said, free that time up to work on more creative things, that's going to be fantastic. So I hope, like I said, I'm not sure if Ronnie's here, but I hope I nailed that, Ronnie, because I know your approach is a little more nuanced than some of the other responses. Okay, we also asked everybody about job security. There have unfortunately been a lot of layoffs this year. I checked the layoffs.fyi calculator just this morning, and it said that the tech industry, there have been about 250,000 layoffs in the tech industry in 2023 alone. I don't know exactly how many of those are content marketers. I know there's plenty. I personally have talked to quite a few people who have been laid off. That's been a frequent topic of discussion in the Slack community. And so we were curious, like, how are people feeling about their job security? I find it interesting that this graph looks almost exactly like the previous graph. I'm not sure exactly what to make of that. My hope, of course, is that we are through the worst of the layoffs. I don't think that this tech downturn is over by any means. But the layoffs did seem to come over the course of, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 months in sort of this condensed, very intense period of SaaS companies sort of freaking out about what's coming next. Hopefully that's over. I am curious though, like how people feel, just your sentiment on job security. If anyone has thoughts on that in the chat, please leave thoughts there. I would guess that this chart would look basically the same if we asked the question this fall like we did, or last fall, or the fall before. I feel like it actually doesn't tell us quite as much as I was hoping. I think probably we could have been more specific about the question, because like the fact that most people feel pretty secure, and then there's outliers on the other end, seems like kind of obvious. So I think perhaps for next year, we'll be more specific about that. Stress is another. And the reason we asked about this, kind of related to the job security thing, is we just hear about this a lot. Like that, this has been a challenging year. Most people responded that their day-to-day stress level is somewhere between a 6 and a 7, which, for my like personal taste, is too high. Your day-to-day work stress probably shouldn't be that high. Further along in this report, I think you'll start to get a better sense of why, because we sort of ask people like things that they're worrying about on a day-to-day basis. The things that cause stress are quite different depending on the work environment. So like SaaS companies have a very specific set of stresses that they deal with. George, I would imagine on your side, on the agency side, agencies deal with a completely different set of stresses. And I'm curious, it can be subjective, of course, but like how you rate your own day-to-day stress related to work today versus say a year ago.
Whoa, I didn't, expect this question, and I don't know what to answer here. I don't know. I guess this year has been very tough, and we at Minusia definitely had our challenges, especially around summer, where this, at least for us, this whole thing sort of escalated. Things are better now, and we get some like positive signals from the market, and also fixed some things internally. I don't know. Personally, I think I'm getting to a point where, like, when it's like hit after hit after hit, for 4 years straight now, I think you get to a point where you're sort of used to all this. And so I would say that, I don't know if the right word is like, I have a more like stoic approach to all this, but yeah, I can say that I feel stress on a daily basis, but it may be a bit deeper than that, right? But also the fact that you have all these failures, and like you've put out all these fires over the years, definitely helps in being a bit more emotionally detached by what's going on, right? And in the agency world, you know, because you've been at an agency, things happen like every day. So I guess you have to be emotionally detached, otherwise you can't survive, right?
Totally. Yeah, I'm sort of hesitant to proclaim that turmoil is our new normal, but I think it is, at least for the short term. Like, one thing that I took away from the results of this survey is that the changes that are happening in content marketing are happening actively. They're by no means over. And I think that when we do this survey a year from now, the results potentially look quite different, because we just don't know. Like, we don't know what's going to happen with Google and SGE. Like, we don't know if SEO content will be as important in 6 to 12 months. We don't know if content teams are going to continue to rely more heavily on freelancers and in-house people. There's just like a lot of unknown out there. So I would say hang on tight for the next year or so as a lot of this stuff continues to unfold. Yeah, sort of. So I alluded to this in the previous slide, but what concerns you most in your current role? The biggest thing, I mean, this is just for clarification, this is a question where we ask people to check all the boxes that applied. So that's why this chart looks a little different than some of the others. Basically, everybody is concerned about driving results for the business. I find that to be really interesting for a few reasons. One is that, as we discussed, reporting and attribution has historically been really hard. And I think for many companies also has not been a top priority. I think that as budgets have been squeezed, as org charts have changed, as layoffs have happened, more people are thinking about, hey, is the work that we're doing helping the business? Right? And like, how do we even know if it is? Like, maybe we don't have like a really strong process in place to make sure that it's happening. Maybe we don't have a data person that can do it for us and we have to figure it out ourselves. Maybe that we did the analysis and found that our content strategy actually was maybe not working as well as we hoped it would. So I find that to be really interesting. The second thing on here is changes in Google search, which I feel like is still this kind of like looming thing that we just don't know. I think we all understand that changes have been happening. More changes are coming, particularly with AI and SGE. I think we just have to wait and see. I think that we can probably expect that the SEO playbook that many companies have run for the last probably decade is not going to work, at least not exactly the same as it always has been, where you sort of have like an infinite number of keywords to chase. You create briefs kind of using a tried and true system, and then you write the content and you do that over and over and over again. I don't feel quite confident that that's going to work. Something else is going to work, but we'll see. Curious, George, again, from the agency side, like, are those the two things that, as you talk to your clients, that are top of mind for these content teams? Like, when they come to you, do they say things like, help us navigate changing search and prove our content results for leadership?
First of all, I would say that I will start with the second point, which is changes in Google search. And I would say that this means that a big chunk, like half of the people almost who responded to this survey, included or focused on content for search audience, right? And so if you take that away from these people, okay, how are we going to fill our pipeline and how are we going to drive results? And so this tells us something about how things are done. And I connect that with the first one, which is driving results, obviously, because if someone takes Google from you and traffic from organic search, it will be more difficult to drive results. And at the same time, I think that it's interesting that we see that people are concerned about communicating the value of what they do, because like it may be that, you know, they drive results, or maybe they are not able to drive results. But in many cases, what's missing is like context, right? From reporting, for content marketing. So it's not like everything has to be connected to a business metric. That's something that the C-suite can understand. But if you add context as to why you're doing that, which, you know, goes back to communication, then like you can get more from like the discussions you have about budget and so on and so forth. So I think that this is one of the most interesting slides, and driving results is definitely important. We can see that people are afraid about changes or concerned about changes in Google search, which means that, you know, this shows us that SEO content was or is still a big part of how they drive results. And at the same time, you know, there is a gap here in communicating the results that they drive or not drive, I don't know, which somehow they need to fill that void. That's what I see here. And yeah, I think this is one of the most interesting slides in this whole presentation and survey that we've done.
Yeah, I agree. I think that over the last couple of years, and I'll raise my hand as guilty of this, is that there's in the content marketing world, there's sort of this dogma around believing in content, whereas like other marketing channels are much more objective. It's just you're tweaking a formula to try to understand how much output you get from a certain input. That's always been more difficult with content marketing. I have called content marketing before a self-fulfilling prophecy, where if you believe it will work, it will work. And I still think there's some truth to that, because content marketing requires a certain amount of creative energy to make it successful. But that has always sort of butted up against, you know, a VP or a CMO who's a bit skeptical. And I have frankly always balked at that a little bit. And so when I see people in the Slack group, for example, saying like, you know, my manager doesn't get it, I'm always like, you know, that manager's an idiot, basically. I think that we're all going to have to be a little bit more mindful of that, though. I think it's actually at the moment quite fair that VPs and CMOs are a little skeptical of content if you are not adapting to what's happening right now. If you're continuing to try to run the same old playbook over and over and over again, and you see that traffic is, you know, slightly decreasing, you see that particularly organic sessions are down, you find that like you do the analysis and it's not supporting business objectives, et cetera, like you are going to have to make changes. And at least today in this environment, expect skepticism from management over this kind of thing. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Sort of related to job security. I probably should have put this slide up with that one. Is how frequently do you look at other jobs? I found this kind of similar to the job security questions. Like, I'm not sure how different this would be if we could take the same snapshot a year ago, a year from now, 2 years ago, et cetera. I think most content marketers are kind of always on the lookout. Not that they have a foot out the door necessarily, but just curious, like what else is out there. So for the folks who are looking daily and weekly, I feel you. There's not a ton out there right now. Like, you know, as someone who runs a job board, I would love to see more jobs out there. But I think that most companies are still very hesitant to add headcount. Not true across the board, but kind of generally, folks are hesitant to add headcount. And so the fact that the average content marketer is looking kind of like monthly, maybe quarterly, I think makes sense. We do have one question in the chat, which is what's the best way to show content results? What kind of reports work best? That's kind of there's a lot in there. We actually did a webinar on content reporting, which is on the Superpath blog. If you do a search for reporting on the Superpath site, you'll find it. In that webinar, I sort of outlined a process for doing it that I think is still pretty good. It's sort of a mix of the numbers that I think are important to track, and then a way to collect anecdotal feedback, essentially, like actual people, names and faces. Oh, there's a link. Thanks, Eric. To support the story, right? So it's like you have data, you need to use other inputs, um, things people say on social, things your salespeople hear on calls, things like that, to kind of wrap the data in a narrative. I think that's still the right way to go. Um, like I said, though, I still think that the content industry is in need of some kind of standardized ways to look at content spend and content return. One other resource I'll point you to is we did a podcast with Lane Scott Jones from Zapier, who talked about how she calculated Zapier's return on content. Very interesting. The whole episode is worth listening to. She's incredibly smart and had a lot of really good things to say, but the section on reporting I think would be particularly helpful. Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Let's get into some budget and headcount related things. So over the last 12 months, has your content budget increased, decreased, or stayed the same? Frankly, I was really surprised to see how many individuals responded that their budget has increased, because what I've heard anecdotally from so many people is the opposite of this. One potential conflating factor here is that as headcounts have decreased, content budgets have potentially increased a little bit, right? So like if a SaaS content team cuts 2 people and their reduced headcount and payroll expenses by say $200,000 a year, and then they add $50,000 a year to the content budget, the budget has increased, but the overall spend has decreased. The question wasn't specific enough to capture that exact thing, but I am so surprised that uh, that many folks' budgets have increased that I'm skeptical that there isn't like something else behind it that we're not totally aware of. The Obviously many of these folks' budgets have decreased still. It's split like more evenly than I thought, sort of like I said, but that's the story that I have heard mostly, is that we have less budget to spend. I will also caveat that by saying I often hear that on sales calls where I'm trying to sell a company on a content plan through our marketplace. And so that's an easy excuse if like you're not ready to buy or don't want to buy or whatever. So I'll caveat that. But I am curious, George, like from your perspective, and it's kind of the same thing. Like you may hear this mostly in the context of sales related conversations, but are you hearing about budgets, and which direction do you feel like they're going?
First of all, let me preface that by saying that we work mostly with bigger companies, post-Series A, pre-IPO, public companies. So I can't say that this is representative of like the results that we see here. And it's a mixed bag. I mean, in most cases, though, our clients haven't decreased the budget. If anything, some of them seem to be ready to accelerate, right? But I'm somehow surprised that a big chunk of folks said that their budget has been, content budget specifically, has been increased. But it may be what we were discussing, I don't know when, before one of our webinars or something like that. It may be that people cannot increase their headcount, and they have more budget to spend on agencies. This is something that definitely helped us because I hear this in sales calls, and I also hear it from like our clients, like headcount is freezed and we need to do something about it. Like we need to do stuff, get like things going, but I can't add more people. So this is why we will outsource more. But as I mentioned, like this comes mostly from bigger companies. So I'm not sure whether this is like representative of the like results we got. But in general, I would say my impression is I'm pretty excited, like surprised by this slide. Yeah,
I agree with you for sure. I was relieved to see that it wasn't just a circle with one color where everybody was saying their budgets have decreased. Somewhat related to this is, over the last 12 months, has your in-house content team size grown, shrunk, or stayed the same? And the results here are kind of similar. John in the chat had a question about this. He said, how do the survey results saying that 40% of content teams have grown match with the layoffs and the impression that most teams aren't hiring? The only explanation I have for that, John, is that because this is looking at the last 12 months, but really I'd say it's the last like 6 to 8 months that have been the really challenging time for most teams, that it's possible or maybe even likely that teams were still hiring 12 months ago. The team maybe grew from 3 to 6 and then back to 4 or 5. I think that's probably happened on a lot of teams where they were hiring very aggressively throughout 2020, 2021, and into 2022, and then have started shrinking things back down in 2023. That's the best explanation that I have for that. Also, the impression that most teams aren't hiring. From my perspective, through like just looking at our own job board, just sort of keeping an eye on other job boards where content roles are regularly posted, there are a lot fewer jobs out there. I just talked to someone yesterday actually who has a job up on the Superpath job board, and he was telling me that he is just overwhelmed with really qualified people. Um, so if you are hiring, it's a great time. But kind of that story tells me or sort of validates some of the other things I've been seeing, which is that there's just not that much out there right now. Um, Overall, though, I think that this also paints a good picture in the sense of the job security piece that we talked about earlier. Like, obviously, we want content marketers to feel secure in their roles. We want companies to hire great people, take care of them, pay them well, give them the resources they need to do their job. So again, this is one where I was like a little scared when I looked at the results that it was going to paint a more negative picture than it actually did, and I was fairly pleased to see these results.
Jimmy, if I may jump in here and say something about security, because I was thinking it when we were on that slide. The word security it's kind of, I was thinking that if someone, for example, is concerned about how to drive results, that may lead to insecurity about their role, right? So it may not be that these people feel that, you know what, I may get fired or anything, or the company I'm working at may have layoffs, but it may be that due to all these changes and some of the facts that like make them feel concerned are also the same things that make them feel insecure. I don't know if that makes sense, but I guess we should be a bit careful as to how we perceive the word secure, right? Because security is different for every person, right? Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, you're totally right. I think that there's probably plenty of people who were laid off this year who felt their jobs actually were quite secure. Eric in the chat actually said that he interprets a 7 out of 10 job confidence as someone basically saying, "I hope I'm safe." So I agree that that question next year needs to be more specific to get better data out of it. Okay, kind of along the same lines again, over the last 12 months, has your outsourcing increased, decreased, or stayed the same? Increased significantly. Or sorry, not that it, well, I can't measure it against last year because I don't have that data. Most people, I should say, said that their outsourcing has increased. This totally lines up with things I've heard. A lot of content teams have started looking to agencies and freelancers to supplement content production. This is a trend that's been going on kind of even before this kind of content recession, even before COVID. Like, this was already happening, that in-house content teams were slowly shrinking, and those teams were more focused on things like strategy, reporting, kind of like working across the org with product or demand gen or other teams, while the content production, link building, editing, things like that have steadily been outsourced. I think it totally makes sense, right? It creates a lot of flexibility for the in-house team. It also, like, it's really expensive to hire full-time content creators, for better or worse. Like, I think oftentimes if you hire a full-time person and their person's only job is to write, you sort of put them in a situation where they're highly likely to succeed because they have everything they need, all the people around them, all the resources they need. So I think that totally makes sense. On the other hand, it totally makes sense too that content creation is sometimes tedious. It can be slow. So if you can outsource it to an agency or a freelancer, understand the flat rate you're paying for, it makes the economics of all of it quite a bit simpler too. So I don't know, George, I'll throw that one over to you as well. I'm curious, like, what you've seen on the outsourcing side.
I have quite strong opinions about that. So I would like to chip in here and say that two things. The first is that the playbook is changing, right? Things are changing, and what got us here will not get us to the next level of growth, or whatever that level may be. It's different for each company. Now, this tells me, it's not like I'm me being optimistic because I run an agency. This is how I see it, and I feel that this is where we are heading. It shows me that people working in companies, because we surveyed in-house employees, right? People working in companies will need help to execute the new playbook, whatever that may be, right? Let's say it's not clear right now. That's one thing. The other thing, though, is that agencies have to change and meet the market where it is, which, as I was sharing with you before we start the event, I don't think we are there. Even Minucia's website, for the record, our positioning is off right now. If you go to our website, we still talk about organic growth acceleration and these things that are off right now. I know that we don't meet the market where it is. And obviously, we are going to do something about it. We are going to reposition in Q1 2024. So yes, I see that as an opportunity, because companies will need help to execute that new playbook, whatever that may be. But agencies have to understand that we need to change, right? If we want to actually get the most out of this shift in the market. That's what I'm seeing here, and yeah, yes.
Cool. Yeah, no, totally makes sense. I'll be very curious what happens on the agency side going into next year. I know a lot of agencies have been shaken by a lot of the stuff that's unraveled in 2023, but there's still this really big opportunity to help content teams navigate a lot of these changes. Sorry, just oh yeah, cool. We had some input from a content marketer, Noelina at Constructor, who said our outsourcing has actually decreased because they pivoted to creating more product-led thought leadership content in-house. I thought this was pretty interesting, and I feel like this sort of gets back to one of the things we were talking about earlier, which is sort of the uncertainty in Google search changes. What's going to happen with that? I find it to be SEO content is sort of the easiest thing to outsource, right? Give someone keywords and a brief, and they could just go and do it. So to see a SaaS team kind of refocusing the content they're creating on stuff that doesn't depend on algorithms, that you can tie directly to a product, where you can get, executives' voices out there, like that kind of stuff, I don't think is going to change much, if at all, over the next year or two. So I thought that was a really interesting one, which is why I pulled it out. Obviously, other teams are doing different things, but an interesting perspective. I would not be surprised if there's other teams like Constructor who, as they're trying to figure out what their new content playbook looks like, keep some of it in-house, validate it before they start outsourcing so that they can, ramp up output or whatever. Okay, obviously we have to talk about AI. There's a couple AI questions coming up here. This one, how concerned are you about AI and its impact on content marketing? This chart also looks very familiar. Maybe I should check to make sure we didn't analyze the how excited are you about content data multiple times, because there's a few charts that look almost exactly like that, including this one. I just find it interesting that most people indicated that they are excited about the future of content and that they are concerned about AI's impact on content marketing. And maybe that just kind of paints the picture of where we are right now. Like I mentioned, all of this stuff is changing very actively. So, we will do this again so that we can see how this has changed year over year. I would say I personally fall somewhere in like the kind of the 4 to 5 range of my personal concern about AI. I'm actually cautiously optimistic that it helps all content marketers refocus on creating things that are just genuinely interesting. I think it's possible that we see a surge of creativity and differentiation, that individuals are empowered to go off and do like really cool work, and not just thinking about scale all the time. So for what it's worth, I'm not particularly concerned, but I do think it's interesting that folks are still a little, just sort of hesitant about all of this. Eric said you might want to segment out people who answered one question versus others. Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, we have that data, so we could potentially do that and add it to this report. George, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, it's interesting because people said that the second reason why people feel concerned right now was changes in Google search, right? The thing is that changes in Google search are driven by evolvements in the AI space. So I don't know. It strikes me as odd that people are not more concerned about AI, because this is what drives one of the things that they are most concerned about. So that's one thing. But yeah, besides that, I don't have any other comments here.
Cool. This thing is an interesting one. Oops, sorry. How concerned are you regarding the unauthorized use of AI tools from your in-house team and contractors? Basically, what this question is trying to get at is like, you assign a piece of content. Are you concerned that when you get that back, that this person actually wrote it? Did they use AI? How much? Like, did they use it to help create an outline or to help them kind of brainstorm an intro? Or did they have ChatGPT write an article that they slightly modified? This chart finally looks different. It's sort of spreading out. So I found it somewhat interesting that actually there were more folks who were not concerned about this. I actually would rate myself just personally that I would be more concerned about this. I think a lot of content teams, as they're creating content, whether it's in-house or outsourced, that they need to come up with basically a set of rules that dictates like how much AI do you use and in what capacity, so that they can feel confident that what they're getting back is what they expected. There's nothing wrong with using AI to improve your processes or even to generate content as part of an article. But I think that the folks assigning it think about it very differently, right? So like if you hire a writer to write an article for your blog and you pay them, let's say $600, and they do their research and they interview somebody and they write a piece and they do revisions, that's a lot of work. If you pay them $600 and they spend half an hour in ChatGPT generating stuff and then tweaking it a little bit, like, that person who assigned it, if they were fully aware of that, is going to feel like, well, I could have done that, or I should have paid $100 for this, not $600. So I think it's just some sort of making sure that you and your team are all on the same page is going to be really, really important here. And then just a question for you, George. Do people ask you about this? Like, do your customers want to know, is AI being used? If so, how much? Do some even say like, we're hiring you to have people write content, not AI?
Yeah, so for better or worse, I mean, when this whole AI thing started to really picking up in interest, we took a stance and we said that we are not using AI in the content creation process, right? So we were very clear about that. But we were also very clear with our team now on an internal level that this is not tolerated. And I think that the right term here or phrase is like put everyone on the same page, because don't assume that just because you told someone that, like we are not using AI, they are not going to use it and try to get away with it. And as you said, like it's another thing, like assigning a task to someone and knowing that there will be AI involved, and another paying for them to do the work and like not knowing whether AI was used or not, right? It's fine if AI is used as long as everyone is on the same page. And I would say that, using tools like, I don't know, Originality AI or anything like that will not help you prove that someone used or not used AI. Of course, just the fact that we have to sort of analyze a piece to learn whether or not, to understand whether or not AI has been used is problematic by its own, right? So this whole thing, like the root of it is wrong. But I would say that you have to put people on the same page, and you have to be very clear about the fact that this is not something that we do, or if we do it, this is how we do it, and so on. And SOP would help here. And we had to revise our agreements with our content writers to make sure that we are, covered in the unlike event that something like that happened, and also made sure to communicate how important that is. And at the same time, if you ask me, if you are working at a company that takes a stance that's pro humans, and we want you to write the content, I would say it's a bit naive to use AI when you're the company you're working at takes a stance and sort of supports you writing the content, right? So I could elaborate on that, but I would say we can keep going. But in a nutshell, this is what we think and some of the actions we took.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We have 6 or 7 slides left in about 10 minutes. So I'm going to run through a couple relatively quickly. And I would encourage folks, if you have questions or any other talking points, drop them as I run through these, and we'll do our best to get to those before the hour is up. Cool, let's do this. Over the last 12 months, have you used AI in any part of your content creation process? Duh. I mean, I feel like we had to ask this, but 91% of people said yes. Kind of curious what the other 8.5% are doing that aren't touching AI at all. Got a quote here from Eric, who talked about basically trying AI on everything that he does and just seeing, right? Like finding that it's not particularly helpful for just straight up content creation, but finding that is very helpful for repurposing and distributing content, as well as some other kind of workflow related tasks that just make everything move a little quicker. Okay, here we ask people, how are you using AI tools in your current workflow? This is another one where folks could check all that apply. So outline and brief creation was number one. I found this to be, that's interesting, but also somewhat obvious. It's a very, very good use case for getting started with an article. It happened, you can do it very quickly, particularly if the piece is SEO. SEO articles tend to follow a relatively similar structure, so that makes a ton of sense. Content creation, I was frankly a little disappointed to see that was so high up, because I feel like that's, as Jenna alluded to in the chat, not a great use case for AI right now. Some of these others are interesting. Coming up with topics is great. Love that. Repurposing, love that. Editing, also love that. Lane Scott Jones from Zapier talked quite a bit about that on her podcast episode too, if anyone's interested in that. So overall, nothing incredibly surprising here, but just interesting to see some of the different ways that people are thinking about this. Okay, over the last 12 months, have you considered replacing any of your internal or external resources with AI? This is just sort of getting back to this question of what does the content team look like and who writes? I feel like I find myself coming back to the who writes question quite a bit. Every content team 10 years ago was a bunch of writers, and that has changed so much as we've, companies sort of figured out that they create flexibility and probably cost savings by having agencies or freelancers do the actual writing part for them. That was part of what we were trying to get at with this question is this who writes bit. Will it move from in-house to freelance to AI? I don't think it will be quite that dramatic. But I was interested to see that more than half the people have at least considered replacing actual resources. That could be people, that also could be tools that they use with AI. So I think we're going to see obviously a lot more of that. And there's a few more AI things to run through here. One is just sentiment. What's your company sentiment, not just your own personal sentiment? Not surprising that a lot of people are bullish on it. So I don't know that there's a ton to unpack there. I found this to be a very interesting one. How much does your team spend monthly on AI tools like ChatGPT, as well as others like Jasper, Writer, Copy AI, et cetera? And I found one of the things I find fascinating about AI is it's changing the whole world. Not just content marketing. AI is going to change everything, and it costs $20 a month. It's just so incredibly inexpensive for what it is. I don't really know what to make of that, other than I worry a little bit about some of these companies which are essentially building interfaces on top of OpenAI's API and then charging, $15, $20 a month for it. Is that going to be sustainable? I don't know. That's kind of beyond the scope of this survey and report. But I just find that the costs associated with this stuff are just so incredibly low, where typically you would see a curve where it's expensive, there's early adopters, right? It gets cheaper over time as the tech gets better and things like that. So kind thing for content marketers is if you want to play around with it, it doesn't cost very much, and most teams are not spending much at all on these tools.
Before we move on, can I? Amy is making a good point about why we are cautious about AI content. And Amy, I would say there are many reasons. I will give you just one. I mentioned earlier that we are working with bigger companies, and you would be surprised by the fact that bigger companies have different concerns than, say, a scrappy startup that just trying to get things off the ground and so on. So one of the things that they are concerned about like security and privacy, but also how the brand is represented online. And if you add something like, we are writing about topics it's called Your Money, Your Life space. Like we are talking about something like a health issue, right? And let's say that AI was involved in the content creation process. Now, let's say that AI said something inaccurate and that passed through the editing processes and everything, right? And someone goes and reads that article and follows that advice that we shared. Who is going to take the responsibility for that? Because it's surely not going to be AI, right? So I think that that's it's a great point that you're bringing up, and definitely we have to have a discussion about that. But I would say that it really depends, right? And I just outlined an issue that a bigger company may have, and these companies are very cautious with their brand and how they are represented online and offline, obviously, and so on and so forth. So many extensions and many repercussions that of things that can go wrong in case AI missed the mark about something or said something inaccurate or anything like that. I don't know, Jimmy, if you have anything to add here, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's very well put. I feel like for most teams, there's a liability question, and then there's also one thing you really don't want to happen is that, like you said, something AI generated ends up on your site, and then some issue arises with it, and then the CEO points to the content team and said, "How did this get out?" There's no policy for this. There's no basically just more about everyone being on the same page and being clear about what do we agree is a proper way to use AI, and then what is our process for fact checking, editing, things like that. There's a couple comments here about this slide that we're looking at right now. Heather, I think, asked a great question, which is how long do you think this will last, meaning low prices for AI tools? Will it be kind of like Uber, where they charge so little for so long, but now prices have risen? I think that is actually very possible. I don't know how much money Copy AI has raised, but Jasper and Writer have both raised a ton of money, and fairly recently. That venture capital money essentially subsidizes user adoption, gets it into people's hands, and in the meantime, those companies are trying to figure out how to make their software much more proprietary. I think they're really trying to get away from this idea of a ChatGPT wrapper, where you just take ChatGPT and make it for marketing people. Sarge, go ahead.
I was just going to say that this was one of the sort of predictions, quote unquote, we made in one of the webinars we did about the use cases of AI in content marketing. And I think that for companies that are reliant on, another technology like ChatGPT and OpenAI, and most of the tools out there are just, distributors, quote unquote, of OpenAI's IP, right? This is what this is all about. Yes, they add more on top of that so that it's not like a generalist, and so that it's, I don't know, like a marketing specialist that gives you the output after you insert the prompt. But for the most part, it's the same technology. Now, imagine if in the future OpenAI dominates and the market and decides to increase their API prices by 2x, 3x, 4x, right? What are these tools going to do? Are they going to 2x, 3x, 4x their prices for something as commoditized as AI content? I don't know. I have a question mark there. Of course, now all these tools are, riding high, but I guess this is a possibility. And we also have to keep that in mind as like companies and like individuals who are reliant on these tools to like do our job, right? Yeah.
Cool. No, I totally agree with you there. I think we're very close here, so I'll try to get through these last couple slides. Sorry, this is supposed to say, yeah, oh, sorry, has SEO become more or less important? Interestingly, it's become more important to many folks, which to me feels somewhat contradictory, just given the concerns around like what's going to happen with SEO. Like, one thing I hear from a lot of people is just like we're kind of holding off. We're not like making huge investments in SEO right now until we have more clarity on what's going to be happening. So this is another one that I'd be real curious what this looks like next year. And then your areas of concern regarding SEO content. Sorry, main areas of focus, not concern. I apologize. Content creation, obvious one. On page, programmatic, link building. Yeah. So this, I don't know if anything stands out for you here, George, but I feel like this is more or less what I would have expected from this question.
Yeah, I mean, same here.
Cool. Oh, that's it. That was the last one. Sorry, I was racing through those. So I guess a couple quick things to wrap up here. Content marketers generally are pretty optimistic. So I think we can all feel good about that, right? I sort of breathed a sigh of relief when I just sort of got a better sense of how people feel and put some data behind that. The AI stuff, there's just so much uncertainty out there. And while many people I think are feeling at least some kind of like cautious optimism, maybe some mild excitement, there's just still so much unknown and so much change still happening. Regarding job security and team structure and headcount, things like that, this downturn is not over. TBD on how long this plays out. I really obviously hope that the worst of the layoffs are over. And I do think that they are, based on all the conversations I have with companies, but there's still some more to come here. And then again, can't reiterate enough how much this situation is actively changing. It's by no means over. In 5 years, we'll look back and we'll have perfect clarity on all of it, but we are definitely not there yet. So I know some folks probably have to go to their next call on with the rest of their day. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you also to the 685 people who responded to the survey. We really, really appreciate it. That's why we have data to report back on. We'll be sharing this on social over the next couple of days, so any help amplifying that would be fantastic. Any closing thoughts on your side, George?
No, I want to thank you and the team at Superpath, of course, for organizing all this, and people who like spent as much time as they spent to